My sister lied to everyone until I caught her red-handed. Alright, Reddit. I still can't believe what happened. I really wish I could say this was some weird dream or a really bad prank, but no. This was real life, and it was one of the most heartbreaking things I've ever experienced. So let's start with a little background. I, 26F, have been in a relationship with my boyfriend, Ryan, 29M, for about 3 years now. Things were great at first, like those everything's perfect kind of vibes. We've traveled together, moved in together, and we've talked about getting engaged, having kids, all that. My family really liked him, and even though my sister, Jess, 24F, could sometimes be a little distant with him, she didn't seem to have a problem with him, or so I thought. Jess and I, while not extremely close, have always had a pretty solid relationship. We had our ups and downs, but at the end of the day, she was my sister. We'd hang out sometimes, but nothing ever seemed out of the ordinary. Honestly, we lived our own lives. I had my circle of friends, she had hers. It was kind of a you-do-you thing with no real drama. Everything was fine until a few months ago. I don't know exactly when it started, but Ryan and Jess became closer. It wasn't anything obvious at first, just little things. She'd call him when she needed advice about something, or ask him for help with tech stuff, since he was always the one who knew how to fix her phone when it acted up. I was fine with that. I mean, they were both adults and Jess wasn't a child. She could hang out with him, right? But something shifted slowly in the months leading up to, well, the moment everything fell apart. It was subtle at first. Jess would act weird when she'd talk about Ryan. Like, she'd get this awkward look on her face when she mentioned him, or she'd avoid eye contact whenever I brought up how much time they'd been spending together. Felt like she was hiding something, but I couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. Maybe it was just me being paranoid. But then things started escalating. Ryan started pulling away a little too. He'd be busy when I called or needed him, and he was always working late. I'll be honest, I wasn't blind. I knew something was up. He wasn't the type to lie, at least not to me. And Jess, she was acting weird every time I mentioned him. Till comments like, "Oh, Ryan's the one who knows how to do that, huh?" Or, "I bet Ryan would be happy to help with that." But it wasn't until one Saturday evening that everything blew up in my face. I had planned a night out with some of my friends and had invited Jess along. It wasn't anything special, just a casual dinner at a local spot, but when I texted her to confirm, she canceled last minute, claiming she wasn't feeling well. I thought it was a little odd, but whatever, no big deal. I went out with my friends, had a good time, and ended up coming home a little later than usual. And then it happened. I walked into my apartment, thinking Ryan would be home, but it was eerily quiet. I checked the bedroom and the door was slightly ajar. I called out for him, but no answer. And that's when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of muffled voices. I froze. It was coming from our bedroom. I couldn't believe what was happening. The air felt thick, and for a second I wasn't sure what to do. But then I pushed the door open just a crack and saw Ryan and Jess. They were in my bed in an intimate position. Time seemed to stop for a moment. My stomach turned. I didn't even know how to process it. I just stood there, completely frozen, staring at the scene in front of me. They were so close, I felt like I was being suffocated by it. Ryan looked up, and I saw the fear in his eyes. He immediately pulled away from Jess, but it was too late. I had seen everything. I felt like the world had just shifted under me, like the floor was giving way, and I was about to fall into an abyss. My heart was pounding in my chest, each beat painfully loud in my ears. My stomach twisted in a way I had never felt before, like I was going to be sick, but also like I was being suffocated by this overwhelming wave of betrayal. I stood there frozen for a moment, unable to process what I was seeing. The only thing that broke through the fog of confusion and shock was the overwhelming sense of disgust that rose from deep within me. Ryan was sitting on the edge of our bed, his back to me, his body tense like he had just been caught doing something illegal. He looked up when he heard me, and his face went pale, his eyes wide with panic. But it wasn't just his face that shocked me, it was the sheer horror in his expression. As if he had been caught red-handed doing something unforgivable. And to make it worse, he was sitting on our bed, the bed we shared for years. The bed that had been the scene of so many of our memories, so many intimate moments. And now it felt like it had been violated by him and by her. And then I saw Jess. She was on the bed too, still trying to pull away from him, but her movements were awkward, like she had been caught in the act and didn't know how to salvage it. Her eyes locked onto mine, wide with panic and a mix of guilt and defiance. But what struck me most was the look on her face, the way she was trying to act like nothing was wrong. She wasn't even remotely sorry. She looked at me like she had done nothing wrong, like I was the one invading their space. I felt a rush of heat rise to my face. Every inch of me screamed in disbelief, in absolute revulsion. It wasn't just that I had walked in on them together. It was that they were on my bed, on the bed that I trusted, the bed that held so many of our private moments. I had built my life around Ryan, around us being a team. And now that space, the one place I thought was sacred, the place I thought was ours, had been desecrated. Jess, my sister, the one person I trusted with everything, the one I thought I could count on, was now sitting there with my boyfriend on the very thing that had always been mine. Betrayal was more than just physical. It felt like my entire sense of self was being ripped apart. The air was thick with tension, so heavy I could barely breathe. I didn't know if I wanted to scream, cry, or just run away. But I was paralyzed, staring at the two of them like I had just stepped into some kind of nightmare. I wanted to lash out, to hurt them like they had hurt me. But I couldn't move, couldn't find the words. Ryan opened his mouth, probably to explain himself, to say anything that could make this make sense, but I couldn't even hear him. His words were muffled by the buzzing in my ears. All I could do was look at him and feel that gut-wrenching disgust. And then I looked at Jess again. I couldn't even look at her the same way anymore. My sister, who I had shared everything with, who had been there through my best and worst moments, was now sitting there on my bed with him. Her hair was disheveled, her face flushed, and her eyes avoided mine like she couldn't face me. But I could see the smugness there too, that glimmer of defiance in her expression. She was trying to act like she hadn't just destroyed everything I cared about. I was sitting there as if she hadn't just crossed the most unforgivable line. My hands shook as I gripped the doorframe, my nails digging into the wood. I wanted to say something, anything, but I couldn't form the words. It was like everything was being suffocated inside me, and the only thing I could do was stand there in that doorway, completely broken. Jess was the first to speak, her voice faltering, but she still tried to hold that cool exterior. "It's not what it looks like," she said, but her voice cracked, betraying her. She shifted uncomfortably, looking at Ryan for reassurance, but he just stared at me, guilt washing over him in waves. I didn't trust my voice, so I didn't say anything. I just turned and walked out, my mind racing, my heart shattered into a million pieces. What had just happened? How had everything I thought I knew, everything I thought was real, just crumbled in an instant? I didn't know where I was going. My legs just carried me, like I was on autopilot. The cold air hit my face as I slammed the door behind me, but it didn't even register. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, each pulse an unbearable reminder of the betrayal that had just unfolded. I walked for what felt like hours, but I couldn't tell you where I was headed. The streets blurred in my vision, like I was lost in some surreal fog. What had I just witnessed? My sister, my own sister, and Ryan, the man I had spent the last 3 years building my life with. I had imagined so many things about our future. Children, a home, a life together forever. I had pictured us in a cozy little house, our kids running around the backyard, laughter filling the rooms. I had imagined old age with him, sharing the mundane moments and the big milestones. We were supposed to be a team. We were supposed to grow old together, side by side. But now it felt like everything I had ever wanted, everything I had built my future around, had just been ripped away in an instant. I could still feel the chill of their betrayal in my bones. How could I have been so blind? How could I have trusted them both so fully? How could I have been so naive, thinking that they would never hurt me like this? I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw things, break things, burn everything to the ground. But instead, I just kept walking. My mind was spinning, my thoughts running wild. It felt like my whole world had just shattered, and all I could do was watch it fall apart around me. Every dream I had built in my head, every plan for the future, felt like it had been reduced to dust. I kept walking, not knowing where I was going, but needing to get as far away from them as possible. I couldn't face them. I couldn't look at them. Thought of returning to that house, to the place where they had so casually destroyed everything, made my stomach turn. My mind kept circling back to that image of them on my bed. The bed that had always felt so safe, so private. But now, it was just a reminder of how deep the betrayal ran. After a while, I realized I had no idea where I was. The streets around me were unfamiliar, the silence heavy and suffocating. I pulled out my phone, staring at it blankly. I could feel the weight of the world pressing down on me like it was too much to bear. But then my phone buzzed in my hand. It was a message from Jess. "I'm sorry, you have to understand it wasn't what it seemed." I scoffed, shaking my head as if that could somehow make me feel better. I didn't want to hear any excuses. I didn't want to hear her try to explain away the unexplainable. What was there to explain? She had betrayed me. She had betrayed me. I had trusted her with everything, and she had thrown it all away. I was still staring at the screen when another message came through, this time from Ryan. "Please, just listen to me. We can explain. It wasn't like you think. It was a mistake." A mistake? A mistake? How could it be a mistake? How could they possibly justify this? My hands were trembling, my entire body shaking with a mixture of anger and sadness, and all I could think about was how their words didn't mean a damn thing anymore. I blocked both of them. As soon as I did, I felt this strange relief flood over me. I didn't need their apologies or their excuses. I didn't need them to explain away their actions. What mattered was that they had done it. They had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I didn't care what they had to say. I needed to get away. I needed to get as far away from them as possible, so I kept walking. Eventually, I found myself at a small park, the silence around me almost comforting in its stillness. I sat down on one of the benches, the weight of everything settling into my bones. I didn't even know how long I had been walking, but it didn't matter. I didn't want to go back to that house to face them. I didn't know what I was supposed to do now. It felt like everything I had believed in was gone, like the world I had built with Ryan, with Jess, was a lie. Looked up at the sky, the sun beginning to set in the distance. The colors were soft, the light fading into twilight. For a moment, I let myself breathe. I let the tears fall, the emotions I had been holding back finally breaking free. But even as I cried, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let them destroy me. I wasn't going to let them win. And as the darkness began to settle over the park, I made a vow to myself. I was going to move on. I was going to find a way to heal, even if it meant walking away from everything I had once thought I knew. I wasn't going to let them take my peace, my happiness. Not now, not ever. I stood up, wiped my face, and walked away. The night was just beginning, and so was I. The next few days passed in a blur. I stayed at my best friend's place, Jess and Ryan. Those two names felt like a sick joke now, constantly tried to reach out. Texts, calls, voicemails. They all blended together, each one more desperate than the last, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. I wasn't ready to face them. I didn't even know if I ever would be. One night, as I was scrolling through my phone aimlessly, I got a message from my mom. She had heard the news from my sister. Jess had been the one to tell her, naturally, and wanted to know what was going on. I hadn't spoken to my mom in days, and I hadn't had the energy to explain things. Honestly, I didn't even know how to explain them. How could I? How do you explain to your own mother that the man you were planning to spend your life with, the one you thought you could trust above all others, had been sleeping with your sister? I almost didn't open her message, but something inside of me told me I should at least acknowledge it. I took a deep breath, then typed out a quick response. I'll explain everything later, just not now. She didn't reply right away, and I was grateful for that. I didn't want to deal with anyone else's questions or concerns, especially not right now. A few days passed, and I started to gather my things. I couldn't stay at Jess's place forever, and I didn't want to go back to my own apartment. I had rented it with Ryan, and the thought of being there alone made my stomach turn. Instead, I started looking for a new place, somewhere far enough from them that I could start over. Didn't need their drama anymore, and I didn't need their toxic energy following me around. I was in the middle of packing when I got the message. Can we talk? It was from Ryan. I stared at the screen, my hand hovering over the keyboard. Part of me wanted to throw the phone against the wall. Part of me wanted to just forget he ever existed. But there was a tiny, flickering part that wondered if he was actually sincere, if maybe he regretted what had happened. That part was weak, fragile, and I hated it. I took a deep breath and decided not to answer. I had done enough of that in the past. Every time I allowed him back in, every time I tried to hear his side of things, it just made things worse. I wasn't about to fall into that trap again, not this time. I put my phone down, focusing on packing up the last few things. I wasn't going to let him make me feel guilty. Not again. A week later, I had secured a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood. It wasn't much, but it was mine. It felt like a fresh start. I spent the next few days settling in, making the space my own, and finding a sense of calm in the chaos of the past. But the reality of the situation was hard to escape. Every time I unpacked a box or arranged something in my new place, I couldn't shake the memories of everything that had happened. Would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how everything had fallen apart, how it had all seemed so perfect, so certain just a few weeks ago. But I couldn't go back. I couldn't undo what had been done. And as much as I wished I could, I knew deep down that I was better off without Ryan and Jess. They didn't deserve a place in my life. I didn't need their lies or their betrayal. It was 2 weeks later when I got a knock on my door. Wasn't expecting anyone, so when I opened it, I was surprised to see Ryan standing there. His eyes were red like he hadn't been sleeping, and he looked almost vulnerable. That was a side of him I'd never seen before, but I wasn't sure I cared anymore. Can we talk? He asked, his voice softer than I remembered. I wanted to say no, slam the door in his face, and never look back. But something in the way he looked at me, something in the weight of his gaze, made me hesitate. Do you want Ryan? I asked, crossing my arms over my chest. I wasn't going to make this easy for him. I know you're angry, he said, his voice breaking slightly. Hell, I deserve it, but I need you to know I never meant to hurt you. It was a mistake, and I've been thinking about it every single day since. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to, but I knew better now. I had learned the hard way that words were just that, words. They didn't mean anything when actions spoke louder. Don't want to hear it, I replied, my voice cold and firm. You don't get to apologize for what you did. You don't get to just walk back into my life like nothing happened. His face fell, and for a moment I felt a pang of guilt, but I quickly pushed it aside. I wasn't the one who had betrayed him. I wasn't the one who had destroyed everything. He started, but I cut him off. No, you had your chance. You had more chances than you deserved. And I'm done, I said, my words sharp and final. Ryan stood there for a moment, his eyes searching mine, probably hopping for a sign that I still cared. But there was nothing left. I'm sorry, but this is over, I said, closing the door gently but firmly in his face. And that was it. That was the last time I saw him. It wasn't some dramatic ending, no big confrontation. It was just over. And as much as it hurt, I knew it was for the best. I didn't need him anymore. And I didn't need Jess either. The road to healing wasn't going to be easy, but I was starting to find my footing again. I had to rebuild my life, but this time I was doing it for me. Not for him. Not for anyone else. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had control over my own story again. And that was enough.